Good morning. We look today at Deuteronomy chapters 5 through 8. And in chapter 5 are the Ten Commandments revisited. And so Moses is now again, remember, speaking to the generation that is about to inherit and move into the promised land. And he's saying to them that, God didn't just speak to your parents and your grandparents, but God is speaking these words to you. And it's a reminder for us today that as we read these words, that God speaks these words to us yet today. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your hearing today, and learn them carefully." And then he goes through the Ten Commandments again, reminding them that God wrote the Ten Commandments on the stones. I mean, it wasn't Moses that chiseled them out; it was God's fingers that etched those words into those stone tablets two different times, because the first set of tablets were broken. He says, "I am the Lord your God," and then the reminder, who brought you out of Egypt, and who is being true to my word to you. I brought you out of bondage, and then you shall have no other gods. And then verse 8, is the expansion of that. You shall not make for yourself any carved image. Don't start worshiping idols and boxes and money, and worship God only. And verse 11, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. And I think about how many times how many times I hear God's name used, in casual manner so often, and I don't hear it so awful much because I don't interact with people on an everyday basis anymore. A lot of times I'm just alone out here, but when I am around people, it doesn't matter where, it seems that you hear that so often. And I think that's one of the commandments that as a people we feel less that's a real sin, to take God's name in vain. And then observe the Sabbath, and expands it. And this is where, like in Jesus' day, the Sabbath was so careful. I mean, they could hardly draw water out of a well or do any of those things. And the honor your father and your mother. This is the first of the Ten Commandments that deals with our interhuman relationships. And as we honor our mother and father, we show them respect, and not only our parents, but our grandparents, our elders. And it's sad to say that a lot of them aren't real great examples, but family is important, and fathers and mothers, that respect needs to go both ways. And fathers and mothers, it's teach your children, and that comes up in here as well. Not right in the Ten Commandments, but it's that parents, it's our responsibility as parents and as grandparents to teach our children. And that's why at a young age we teach them to pray a nighttime prayer. It may be a simple I see the moon sees me, God bless the moon, God bless me, or and as they grow older we teach them more prayers and the Lord's Prayer and all of those things. But so the first 22 verses of Deuteronomy 5 are going through the Ten Commandments again. And you can, if you want to go back to Exodus 20, that's where they're first given that way. And then the second part of Deuteronomy 5 is that the people are afraid of God's presence. And we remember that from reading previously as well, that, they didn't want to hear God's voice. They didn't want to, because they were afraid of that. It struck fear into them. And as much as God was evident to them in the cloud or the pillar of fire, they didn't want to hear him speak. And they said, "Moses, you go and then you tell us and we will listen." So it was a reminder, it's a reminder to us that, to be in the presence of God is intimidating. And I think that's true for us today as well. Many people are intimidated by the thought of going to church, by the thought of praying, by talking, and I'm certainly not worthy of God listening to me, but we need to be able to come into God's presence and worship and pray to Him and ask Him. And then verse 32 is just a reminder, therefore you shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. Be careful in how you live. Pay attention. You shall not turn aside to the right or to the left. You shall walk in all the ways the Lord has commanded. We get into chapter 6 and verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And other places it will add, and with all your mind. And then, so this is the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with heart, soul, and mind. And when we attempt that, our lives usually get to be much better. And then verse 6, these words I command you shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. And many of us don't feel qualified to teach our children about the Bible and about God. And I remember being asked to teach Sunday school, and I thought, and I remember being asked to teach confirmation, and it was, and I remember learning more about my faith the first year I taught confirmation than I remembered having ever learned before. And so when we teach our children, we are reinforcing our own beliefs and our thoughts and what it is that we believe and know. So, teach our children and encourage them in God's ways and to follow God. And there's starting in verse 10, then it's the caution against disobedience. When we, if we don't listen to God, we find ourselves in trouble. And it's just, if we're not honest, if we're not upfront, we find ourselves getting into trouble and finding ourselves where we shouldn't be. Verse 16 of chapter 6 is, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. And it's as you tempted him in Massa. The Israelites, as they were being led from captivity to the promised land, continued to fall away from God and continued to wonder where he was. And even when he was so obviously present to them. And, so, he says we are not to tempt God. And, and we sometimes try to bargain with God, well, God, if you will do this for me, I will, and the reality is that, God grants us grace and forgiveness and his love, even, when we're sinners. That's what Paul says. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And that's so important to know and to remember. But, I don't know that we really tempt God so diligently or so much in our lives as we are apt to, maybe forget him or ignore him or so many different things that way. Chapter 7 is a reminder that the Israelites are God's chosen people. And it's when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you will possess, and he's going to drive out all of these other nations. He didn't choose you because you're the greatest nation, you're the most populous nation. He chose you, one of the smallest nations of people, and he chose you to be an example to the others, is what, verse 6, you are a holy people to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for himself, and listen, a special treasure above all the peoples of the earth. And these are God's words to the Jewish people. And sometimes, we forget that the Jewish people are God's chosen people. And still today, I truly believe that, the Israelites are God's chosen people. But God has expanded his love and his grace for all of the Gentiles. And that becomes much more evident, with the teachings of Peter and Paul and Jesus himself, as Jesus, talked with a Samaritan woman and healed children of non-Jewish people and stuff. So that and Peter's vision of clean and unclean and of talking with the Gentiles. So we are all God's chosen people, and he is always faithful to us. In chapter 8, we just briefly, remember the Lord your God. And we have just on Sunday, our gospel text was the temptation of Jesus. And so here in Deuteronomy 8, what is it, verse 3, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So this is where Jesus got that refutation for Satan when he said, if you're hungry, command this stone to become bread. And Jesus knows this text from Deuteronomy, and so there it is. And I you don't live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And the Bible is our blueprint for how we should live. The Bible speaks to us each and every day about our lives and how our lives matter to God and what we should do. And verses 7 through 10 are a reminder that God is bringing the people in. And then verse 11 says, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments. And the last thing I'm going to share with you today is Deuteronomy verse 8, chapter 8, verse 18. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as at this day. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who brings us all the things that are good in our lives.